Welcome everybody. This is our monthly Oracle Temple Salon, which we used to do in the building behind me, the Peace Pentagon, and we switched to this format when COVID struck. And if this is your first time here, I just want to give you a special welcome and thank you for joining us. This is a very special salon because it's the first one of 2021. We meet monthly, and also because Reverend Patrick McCollum is with us tonight. He has been here twice and has done blessings inside the Pentagon. And it is my great honor to introduce him tonight. So Patrick is going to lead us in a New Year blessing, and he's also going to discuss a bit about his path in service to the lady. Patrick is an interfaith chaplain. He's a spiritual mentor. He's an author, and he's a world-renowned peace counselor. He's founder of the McCollum Foundation for Peace, and he's also a member of our advisory board at the Oracle Institute. Most recently, he was nominated by his dear friend, Dr. Jane Goodall, to fill her seat at the United Nations as the messenger of peace. So we're very honored tonight to have Patrick here.
Well, let me start first, before I even do a blessing, just say, I never thought I would make it to 2021, and I'm just wondering how many of you thought that also. You know, this is the kind of stuff they used to talk about as science fiction when I was a kid. You know, and they say in the year 2121, there'll be such, you know, and here we are. We made it. And I think just that itself is a great blessing, because as most of you are probably aware, there's a lot of people who haven't made it this year. I've now lost 13 friends to COVID in less than a year. And then, of course, counsel hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people around that. And so it's a tough year. But let me start out by just giving a blessing for 2021. So you could just join me in spirit for a moment. I'm just putting my hands up. You can look to the sky, close your eyes, meditate, whatever you think is best. Gracious divine, in all your amazing manifestations, please be present with each and every one of us here as we enter into the year 2021, and make your presence known to all those in the world that are in conflict and trouble. Help lead us and guide us back to a place of solidity, of beauty, of peace, of possibilities. Help to get away and get us away from and to overcome the virus and the things that come against us. Let there be beauty, truth, and in the end, let each and every human being in each and every one of us find our true destiny and find true happiness in being accepted for who we are and what we offer to our world. Blessings.
Om Jai. That's our new saying here. We say Om for earth and Jai for victory. Om Jai.
Om Jai. Om Jai. I love it. So I thought I'd talk about two things here. Laura had mentioned, talk a little bit about my work and my connection with the lady and spirituality, and I'll touch on that a little bit. And then also, I'd like to talk a little bit about, from my spiritual perspective, how it is I look to move forward in 2021, considering where we are, and to give you all some thoughts about how you might think about moving forward in 2021. You know, what are the possibilities? Do I think we're going to end up the whole world being destroyed, or are we going to make it? That kind of thing. So let me begin by sharing something about myself with you, and I'll go through this pretty quickly. But in 1965, I was in a fatal motorcycle accident. And in 1965, I was pronounced dead for about 7 minutes, roughly. And I had no heart, no breathing, no anything. And in that process, I went through a tunnel of light, and I saw what we would have called God, because I was a Methodist. And so, you know, God is the divine. And when I went through that tunnel and I saw God and I asked God, what God wanted of me, she said that she wanted me to serve her toward peace. So, first of all, I was a little bit challenged and messed up because there was nothing in my Methodist training to share with me that God could potentially be a woman. And this was in 1965. So nowadays, you know, many people think of, you know, Mother God, Father God. Even the Catholic Church sometimes will say something like that. But this was pretty far out in those days. But, you know, I like to tell people, I had the experience. I saw her, she spoke to me, and there was nothing ever that could shake that experience from me. I'm here 50 years later, and I can still hear her voice, and I still follow her guidance. And so from that day forward, I agreed to dedicate my life to peace and a stable planet, because I see the planet itself as being sacred in addition to us. And that's what I've been working on all this time. So from that experience, there were a couple of things that I learned that I've incorporated into my own spiritual paint box, so to say, and I would like to share it with you. So in my tradition, and no one has to accept what I'm saying, I'm just sharing what my spiritual experience is and how I view the world and our connection with you know, divinity and spirit and each other. And then you can take pieces of it and you can plug it into your own belief system. But in my tradition, they teach that in the beginning, there was nothing, and that it all came together to become what there is. And we acknowledge that there are many different ways that many different peoples from many different cultures acknowledge this moment. Some people believe that God created the earth in 6 or 7 days. Other people think there was a giant turtle swimming through space, and it was so lonely that it cried, and its tears became the stars and eventually the planets and everything else. Some people believe that there was a great mother and that she birthed everything the way that every mother that we see going forward births every living thing. And others just believe that there was like 2 atoms crashed together, or, you know, some kind of forces or radiation, and they exploded and created a big bang and created everything. But when I step back and I look at all those different stories, the one thing I see is that they all have one thing in common. And that is that they all believe there was a beginning, an initiating moment. And I personally have named that moment the luminous light of beginning. And the reason I use that term is because in my own tradition, it says that when divinity first created things, the very first thing that was created was sound, but it didn't have sound. It didn't have sound you could hear. It was like a wave. And it changed into the light of darkness, light that did not have illumination. And so it began to travel away from God, from the divine, from the great mother. And as it moved away, it realized it was moving away from the only thing that was, and it illuminated and became spirit. So in my tradition, light and spirit are important concepts in relationship to how we all are here. So that beginning initial moment, the luminous light of beginning, everyone shares. If it's true that there was an initiating moment, then all of us, Christians, Muslims, pagans, Native Americans, every kind of religion, spirituality you can imagine, all have a common ancestor, that initiating moment itself. And if that is true, we are all family, each and every one of us. And not only that, but the planet and the animals and all the stars and everything else we see are also family, because we all originate from that first initial moment or source. So I think it's really interesting that, you know, in religion and spirituality, we can spend hours and hours and hours arguing about the things we disagree on. And we most often find out they're like 2 or 3 or 5% of our overall belief systems. But those things seem to be important. In my concept of creation itself, in our creation story, in my tradition, it says that creation, when it came to be, is whole and complete, and nothing is outside of it, not even God. and that all possibilities are present within creation. Every question has an answer, every problem has a solution, and every possibility has a path. So when you consider those different things and you look around, you realize that no matter what happens to us, we always have a way out or a way to reconcile or a way to fix it. And the part I like the very most is that I have a big imagination, and many of you probably do. And our imagination is part of creation. And it says in our creation story that if it's part of creation, it is whole and complete. So if you can imagine something, it has to be possible. It has to be that out there within all the things there are, the tools, the pieces, the brushes, the colors, whatever it is to create the thing that you're looking for is present. And all you need to do is find it. And for me, that gives me a great deal of solace and support as I work my way through the world, because we all face challenges every day that are overwhelming. And in this last year, it's been one of the toughest years I can remember in my entire life. But when I look at what's going on, the first thing I say to myself is, there is a solution to this problem. There is something beyond where we are now, and we can direct where we want to go, and we can get there by simply imagining. And so I always think of John Lennon and the song Imagine, because the reality is, for me, the manifestation of peace and possibilities in the world is a simple task. It's just a task of imagining. With that said, let's look at what's going on. You know, we've got the COVID virus, we've got crazy people storming the Capitol, we have half the people in our country hate the other half of the people, and all these different things. There are two differing things going on at the same time right now. One is just part of how nature works. Viruses, diseases, people living to a certain age and dying. These are ordinary, everyday things. And every once in a while, a virus or something like that gets out of whack. And usually the earth itself and all of us end up reconciling it. But the way it normally resolves itself is to kill a whole bunch of people until it gets to a place where it no longer feels that's a benefit, and then it stops killing people, and then everybody survives and moves on, and a large part of the population is cut. We obviously don't want to go that route, but because there are all kinds of possibilities available, we imagined a vaccine, and now just months later, we actually have one. So each of you never need to worry. Whatever it is that comes in front of you, a solution will be present for you to solve it. But you have to look for it, and you have to take a step, and you have to take an action to try to get there. The other thing that's going on for us is a story. It's a very old story. It goes back to the very first human beings, but it's the us versus them story. There is you and I. We're all somehow friends, whatever, because we're on Zoom together. And then there's the other, the people who aren't on Zoom with us, or the people who don't believe my particular spirituality, or maybe the people who are not my skin color, or maybe they're a different sexual orientation or whatever. They're the other. And far back in the beginning of time, when people weren't smart and didn't know, they saw someone else, another tribe over the other side of the hill, and they're going, oh my God, we have to eat, we have to drink. We can't let those people have access to whatever we have access to, because if they take it, we'll all die and starve to death. Unfortunately, the early human beings on our planet weren't aware that there was an incredible planet full of all kinds of resources that could have supported billions more people than who they thought were competition at the time. But that story has passed on through all the different traditions, spiritual, religious traditions, and also through all the different cultures. Till we now have countries and, you know, China's bad and we're good, and the Russians are the bad guys, we're the good guys, the South Koreans are good, the North Koreans are bad. We all got all these stories. And right now we have the people following, at least for me, Trump are bad, and we're good. We need to dump these stories and move into a different place, because the stories themselves are not true. They're just stories. The reality is that probably any person you could pick from the other side, if you were on a one-to-one basis with them and you weren't in the middle of some hyped up crisis, they might well be your friend, or they might even develop to be somebody you have a long-term relationship with. So in order to solve the problems that we see in front of us, from my perspective, we need to change the story that we tell ourselves about who we are, and we need to change the story for the people around us as best as we can to get them to recognize that we are all in this together, that there isn't an us versus them, there's only us. So I think with that, I'm gonna just say my way of moving forward is, I believe that taking a step forward towards the goals that you want is the way that you get there. So I have already taken a step forward towards the other side of what's happening in our country. And I am reaching out and having conversations with people that are pretty crazy from my point of view. And I am listening to them. I am making friendships with them. And I am gradually sharing my ideas with them. And when I tell them the story of that, I believe that we all have a common ancestor, they don't disagree. So we all have something that we can focus on together. I think 2021 is going to be a very hopeful year. Often it requires pressure to create a diamond. It requires pressure and movement to create new things. It creates pressure to make a star that then grows into solar systems and planets. And I think we're under intense pressure right now, but we are all diamonds waiting to be made. And I believe everyone else around us is, and that if we just start thinking about it that way, moving forward in a positive light, and reaching out to those who are in opposition to us, and simply seeing the sacredness in them for a moment before we move to anything else. If we can do those things, we have a good chance to really bring home the possibility of peace. And I want to share one last thing, and then I'll stop and we can move on. When I was in the Middle East, I had an opportunity to speak to one of the leaders of Al-Qaeda at the time, when Al-Qaeda was the biggest problem going in the world. And I met with that guy, and people were going, "You're crazy, you're meeting with him." And, you know, people had guns and masks and all the kind of stuff like you'd see in a TV show. And when I met with the guy, the first thing he said to me is, "You don't seem to be afraid. Aren't you afraid?" And I looked at him, I said, "Why should I be afraid? You're my brother. We all come from the same source, and you're sacred to me. And I recognize and acknowledge your sacredness." And that man from Al-Qaeda started to cry. And we created a relationship. And to this day, that relationship still plays parts in some of the peace work I do in the Middle East. So it just shows you how far you can really go if you reach out. So I think I will stop there. I hope I've given you a couple of ideas about how you might think about how to move forward in the future. And maybe we can talk about some specifics if any of you have questions about, hey, how do we take on this? How do we overcome that? I have all kinds of ideas.